still in hand. I sink my blade all the way into the shoulder of her arm that was holding the gun. She lets out an ear-piercing scream of agony and she writhes in pain. I grab the gun and pull out my shoelace from my shoe to use it to tie her legs together. I did this so that she was unable to escape while I ran downstairs to retrieve my cell phone. I call 911 as I run back upstairs, Taylor still on the floor crying and holding her arm. The police, they arrive in about 15 minutes and she was put into an ambulance, and I never saw her ever again. I gave the police my statement of everything that happened and the events leading up to what occurred that night. I was told a few weeks later by the officer who came to the scene that Taylor would be charged with criminal stalking, trespassing and attempted murder. Her trial, it's set for December 11th of this year. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys. So, I kinda guess this might be an awkward time to ask for you guys to follow me on Facebook and Twitter then, hey? Alright, I'm here till Thursday. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their story for us all here, and I hope you guys are all doing well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. And as always, keep them coming guys, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. Also, please do me a favor and just state in your email what your story is about in the description, and also provide me with a short written statement of consent, just so that I can be above board with everything. And also remember to tell me in the email if you'd like to remain anonymous, and change any names if you don't want particular names to be shared. So, the next topic I'd like to cover, I'm really hoping to do another police stories video and also another military video. I actually had a police stories video up once before, but due to some issues with it, I unfortunately had to take it down. But the video was actually really popular and it had a lot of likes and views and stuff, so it'd be cool to bring up a fresh video to replace it if I could. I also had a military video once before as well, so it would be nice to be able to replace both of these. So for all of you G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. So I just wanted to grab you guys quickly before the video starts for just a few seconds. I want to give our featuring guest Eden a big shout out for her support on this video. Eden is an extremely talented female narrator, and I decided to give her a story to read on the channel for all of you guys to hear. I'm hoping to collaborate more with her in some future videos, because having a female voice will add a lot of depth to stories. Eden is a very humble person. She puts a lot of time into her videos, is extremely talented in many areas, works very hard, and I honestly believe she deserves a lot more support than what she has. I've left a link in the description below to her channel so you guys can go check her stuff out. So Hive members, please go check out Eden's channel, show her some love, and encourage her to continue on with her narrations. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and without further ado, let's begin. Number 4. This story happened about 6 months ago, and although it didn't happen to me, it still really creeps me out. It was a Friday night, and I was attending a friend's sleepover and birthday party. There were about 7 of us in total. The party started out as us playing games from FIFA to Call of Duty. We eventually got bored and decided to go do something we all thought would be funny: ding-dong ditching. For those who don't know what ding-dong ditching is, it's where you go to someone's house, knock, and then run off. We eventually got our coats and headed out. We knocked on about 10 to 20 houses until we came up to a shady looking neighbourhood. It looked pretty deserted to be honest, and kind of gave me the chills. One of my friends, the more brazen one, Josh, said he would go ding-dong ditching down that street. The others agreed and started walking into the neighbourhood. I didn't want to look like a pussy to any of them, so I decided to tag along. We get towards the end of the street and we came up to a sort of small looking house. It looked empty, but Josh said that he wanted to knock on that house. The rest of us were too afraid to, as it did look pretty sketchy. We told Josh that we were going to start walking back to Harrison, our friend's house, and told him to catch up to us after he was done knocking. We walked for about 2 or 3 minutes and then thought, where's Josh? He should be back by now. Ding-dong ditching only takes like 20 or 30 seconds. so obviously something wasn't right. We waited a little while, but eventually we started to panic as we knew that something wasn't right. We decided to go back to the house and search for him. We walked up to the house, but we saw nothing. No one was outside of the house, and Josh wasn't anywhere to be seen. One of us said we should knock on the house and see if anyone was inside. And we did, but there was no answer. We knocked again, but again, there was no answer. Then, while my friend knocked for the third time, I swear I saw a pair of eyes staring directly at me. I immediately told my friends, and we bolted down the path leading to the house. We eventually talked amongst each other. I thought that something was clearly wrong in that house, because who would just stare at us from the window? We decided to call the cops. The cops showed up at our house 10 minutes later, and we described everything we saw, and they asked us to lead them to the house. They told us to then get back to our house, and that they would immediately come back after searching the house. An officer came back 2 hours later, and what he told us scared the living shit out of me. The officer went into the house and brought out a dirty-looking man, maybe in his late 40s. He then found our friend Josh tied up on a bed with only his underpants on. He then brought our friend outside and brought him to the police station. And that's not the scariest part. Our friend told us the whole story about a month later. He told us that he walked up to the house, knocked, and then ran, and he eventually slowed and decided to walk. What he didn't know was the sick fuck was following him. The man then grabbed Josh, covering his mouth, and dragged him back into the house. Josh was tied up, and the man took off all of his clothing. And that's when the man heard us knocking on the door and left the room. Josh was laying on the bed for what seemed like about 20 minutes, he said. And then the police officers came in and took my friend and drove him to the police station. The man was sent to prison, and we haven't heard anything from the police since. Ever since this incident, we haven't, and we're not planning on ever going ding-dong ditching ever again. Understanding what happened to Josh, I now believe that it can happen to anyone, even you.
Number 3.
I'm a 21-year-old female, and I've had something happen to me that has stuck with me for a long time. I was 14 years old, living in the Sierra Nevada mountains in a tiny town called Sonora. I was a well-brought-up child, but had issues with my parents as they would fight, and my father wasn't the nicest man in the world, but he would do anything for me and my older sister. At this time, my sister had been staying with my grandmother for the weekend, and my parents were fighting more than usual. I had been depressed all day until a good friend of mine called Gina called me. She asked me if I wanted to have a slumber party at her house, which for me was just a long walk down the street. I agreed, and I packed up my stuff and told my parents that I was going to be staying at Gina's house, and then I left. When I got to her house, we sat in her room, laughed, drew art for her future tattoos, and watched a few movies, the Tremors movie to be exact. Well, she suddenly got up and left the room, and then called me in and introduced me to a tan guy I'd never met before. He looked normal, almost charming, and he was quite built. He was introduced as her cousin, Blake, and being the innocent 14-year-old I was, I became infatuated with him. We all went back to her room, and I went to the bathroom to change into my PJs. I was caught off guard by the smell of weed coming from Gina's room. I opened the door, and they were taking hits from a small pipe. I was immediately uncomfortable with this, seeing as weed was illegal, but I sat down anyway. They were passing the pipe to one another, and then they passed it to me. I shook my head, and Blake gave me a look and said,
"What? Are you scared?"
I trembled and took the pipe. The taste was awful, and I began to cough. I gave it back to my friend and sat back down and coughed for a bit before the pipe came back around. I told him I didn't want another, and he rolled his eyes and took a hit, and then he pushed me against the wall and breathed the smoke into my mouth. I was disgusted at that point, and I pushed him away. That was a mistake though. After about 30 minutes, they were high, and I was frightened by the change in Blake. He sat down and touched my face with a smile I can only describe as hungry, and I asked him to please not touch me. That's when it started. He slapped me hard and asked me why I was being such a bitch. He then said,
"I know you want this,"
and began to slap me again and again. Then he slapped my leg, my back, then the back of my head, until I was dizzy and crying. My friend was just too baked to realize what was happening, and then he forced me to drink wine. He wanted me to get drunk with him. I took small gulps and he drank half the bottle. He took my wrist and slammed me against the bed and hovered over me. Thinking on my feet, I told him I didn't want to puke on him, and if he could just wait for a few minutes, I'd be ready. He was drunk and high enough to agree, so he laid down next to me and he bear hugged me to his chest. I was ready to scream as I could feel something poking into my thigh. After holding my breath for what felt like hours, he began to snore loudly. I carefully wiggled away from him and slept on the floor in the corner against the wall for a few hours until the sun had just come up, and then I bolted home as fast as I could. I had had an issue with the police in the past that scared me enough not to want to walk home before 6 a.m, and so I was afraid of getting in trouble because of the weed smell. I hopped in the shower and washed my clothes right when I got home. I wish I could say that I went to my parents, the police, or anybody, but I just couldn't. For fear of getting in trouble with my father, I kept it secret until I was much older. Only then did I realize that Blake was a 19-year-old drug addict who also had a history of raping and beating girls much younger than him. I got lucky that night, and I can never sleep at someone's house again without feeling really ill. I don't know whatever came of him, but I sure hope we never see each other ever again.
Number 2.
I'm a 16-year-old female, and as most teenagers do, I always have sleepovers with my friends on the weekends. I do online school, while my best friend goes to public school, so we cherish the time we get to spend with one another. My friend's parents are divorced, and she's usually with her mom, so that's mainly where I'll sleep over. They live south from me quite a ways in a middle-class neighborhood, and I was used to the area, so I never had a problem sleeping over. But this time was different. She was at her dad's house, and he lives up on the hill in the fancier part of town I live in. So when asked to sleep over, I was quite surprised to be told to go to her dad's house. I didn't feel uneasy or anything. It was just weird because I'd never been there before. And I barely knew her dad and stepmom, and in all honesty, that was the first time I'd met her 2-year-old brother. Anyways, my mom drove me there, and the entire time she was faking disappointment. Seeing as my brother and sister weren't home, she was looking forward to spending time with me because I'm the only child who's nice to her. I knew she was joking, and she wasn't serious about being upset. So we laughed it off and had a silly, dramatic goodbye, and as she drove off while I went to the front door. I got inside and all was well. I greeted her parents and little brother. It was nice. My friend Dylan, she's a girl. Just thought I'd clear that up because Dylan is most commonly a boy's name. Anyways, my friend had one of those creepy robotic babies that were used as school projects. And just my luck, I'd be having to spend a night with a literal incarnation of the devil, but in a plastic doll form. The night went on, nothing out of the ordinary. We stayed up like stupid teenagers and mainly sat on our phones and listened to music. The fake baby would occasionally cry, and it wasn't hard to get it to stop. And it was mostly forgotten about. We're terrible parents, we know. We finally decided to settle into bed after we checked the locks in the basement a million times. Because I'm a generally paranoid person, and I hated having a door to the outside so close to my friend's room. I kept reminding myself that I had no reason to freak out because we literally lived in the most uneventful Mormon town in Utah. Nothing ever happens here, so it's not like I feared for my life on a daily basis or anything. Sure, I live close to the capital, but we were deep in the suburbs, so I shouldn't have been as freaked out as I was. Anyways, we laid in our bed trying to sleep. Not me, though. Dylan had handed over the responsibility of taking care of the baby to me. The wristband that was used to interact with the baby was loose enough for her to slip off, so she handed it to me and said, "Have fun." I just laughed and tried to get some sleep. It was around 1 when we went to sleep, and I'm a generally light sleeper. While Dylan can fall asleep in seconds, it usually took me forever to even become tired. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring around the room, knowing the impending doom that was the plastic baby. Finally, I drifted into a light sleep when at about 2 a.m. the baby started crying, which scared me half to death. But I got up and fed its fake bottle for about 20 minutes until it was satisfied. The entire time I sat there, I couldn't help but overanalyze every noise I heard because, like stated, I'm very paranoid. And then I went back to bed. 3:30 a.m. Screams. I quickly changed his diaper. Extremely annoyed, but I just got it over with and went back to bed. Finally, at 4:44 a.m., I'm being specific with the time because I'm not even joking. That's the exact time I woke up. I have a weird connection with that number, and I always seem to wake up at that time. Anyways, I woke up to the baby screaming again. I bolted up, and what I was met with was the most terrifying thing ever. I saw the fake baby being dropped, and then the figure of a man trying to get out of my friend's extremely messy room. Unbeknownst to him, the baby has a sensitive neck. Much like a real baby, you have to support its neck, and if you don't, the baby will begin screaming. I felt frozen, and all I could do was sit there, mouth hung open in shock. I was about to scream when Dylan started doing that for me. The room was absolute chaos. The baby screaming, Dylan screaming, I'm screaming, and this guy trying to open my friend's jammed door. We heard footsteps from upstairs, automatically knowing it was her dad. The man got the door open, and he quickly ran down the hallway and into the main room, which led to the broken open basement doors. I was traumatized, but somehow I managed to grab the baby and put the sensor on it so it would shut up. My friend's dad ran downstairs, but he had just barely missed the guy, seeing as right as my friend's dad ran out, the guy had just hopped the fence. We were all beyond freaked out, but we immediately called the police. They took our statements and all that jazz, but were interrupted by some call that was urgent, so they left. Dylan and I refused to sleep in the basement, so we slept in the living room on the first floor. And her dad allowed us to grab a knife from the kitchen, which he found funny, but we didn't. We were shaking and jumping at every noise. At about 5 a.m., an officer comes to the door to check on us and tell us any news about the guy. Turns out the guy was caught after he'd broken into a house a couple of homes away from my friends. Except this time he was caught trying to steal a real baby. I have no idea why he wanted a baby or what he planned to do with a baby, and I honestly don't want to know. All I know is that the sick fuck is behind bars and that no babies were harmed, whether real or fake. This experience surely fucked me up, and to make it all worse, I discovered that that same night my mom had had a seizure at home. She was alone, and I kicked myself in the butt for not being there to help her, but at the same time, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't have been at my friend's house that night. Both were terrible experiences, and ones I wish to never have to go through again.
Number 1.
My parents and I lived in a very quiet and calm neighborhood. Nothing ever really happened there besides the occasional birthday parties and similar stuff. I was 4 years old, and where we lived, there were 4 lines of houses built in the form of a square. Each corner of the square had an opening to get into your house, as all the doors were facing inwards. My family and I didn't get to do a lot, as both my parents were constantly busy working. In the middle of the square, there was a smaller playground, where I spent most of my time whilst my grandmother, who always watched me when my parents worked, she was cooking, cleaning, or just relaxing in our yard. This one day, in the playground, a boy named Nathan walked up to me and started talking. Us both being very young, we didn't know what the meaning of shy was, so we got along great instantly and started playing with each other, like kids do. We played for a few hours until my grandmother called me saying it was dinner time, so I said goodbye and ran home. The same night, at around 8 or 9 p.m. I'd guess, which is pretty late for 4-year-olds, the doorbell rang, and my mum opened, but no one was there. We didn't think much of it, it was probably just a typical prankster or something. So we all went back to bed, and the next day I went to the playground as usual, and I bumped into Nathan again immediately. I got excited as, well, I didn't have a lot of friends, and those I did lived a fair bit away. We played as usual, and when the evening came, I asked Nathan if he'd like to play at my house, and without hesitation he agreed, which I found pretty odd, as I'd always have to ask my parents' permission before just running home to someone, but I didn't complain. Having a friend was fun. Nathan and I played for a few hours, and I decided to ask him if he wanted to spend the night and have a sleepover. And once again, without hesitation, he agreed. I asked my parents, and they looked at me weirdly, and then just agreed to having Nathan over for the night. I had obviously had dinner by this time, but I'd also noticed that Nathan hadn't had anything today, no lunch, and when I asked if he wanted dinner, he politely declined, stating that he wasn't hungry, which I found hard to believe. We spent the night messing around, being kids and enjoying ourselves, and strangely, our friendship continued like this for about a year, and my parents would always give me a weird look whenever I asked if Nathan could stay for the night. Sometimes Nathan had nightmares too, it seemed, as he'd start screaming, mumbling, rolling around, or just laying there, staring up at the ceiling, which I could see thanks to the moonlight, and it creeped me out. It creeped me out to the point where I started to go to my parents' room each time it happened, to sleep in their bed. Nathan never complained though, and I never asked him about it, as I felt it would be kind of rude to do so. Then, one night, everything changed. For once, we were all at home alone. No Nathan, no relatives, nothing. I went to bed, but got rudely awoken by my father, who dragged me out of the house, and I was terrified and half asleep. I had no reason to be terrified though, as he was carrying me to the car to drop me off at my grandmother's house, as my mother was going to give birth to my sister any minute now. He carried me so that my head was on his shoulder, and I could see behind us, and I saw something sitting on the staircase behind us. I think it was Nathan, and he had a kind of dead look on his face. No emotion whatsoever. I obviously got scared, but didn't think too much of it, and the next day I ignored it, thinking I was sleeping when I saw it. I didn't see much of Nathan after that, and we didn't really play anymore. But weirdly, sometimes I saw him in one of the corners of the square, just staring at me. A few months after my sister's birth, we moved houses, as we needed a bigger one because our family had grown, and since then I've never seen Nathan. In fact, no one has seen him. I never got to go to Nathan's house, which is pretty odd, but at the time, being so young, I didn't think too much about it. And the reason why I decided to share this weird story now is that I asked my parents if they remembered Nathan from our old house when I was a kid, and they just both laughed at me. They said that I had quite the imagination, claiming that Nathan was my imaginary friend. But he wasn't an imaginary friend. I could touch him, fight with him, do human things with him, but apparently my parents never saw him, not once, during the whole year we played with each other, and that sends chills down my spines every time I think about it. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys. And just think, with the holidays coming up, there'll be a ton of time for slumber parties and sleepovers for everyone. Alright, I'm sorry. I just ruined your holiday, I know, I'm really sorry. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their story for us all here. And I hope you're all doing well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. And as always, keep them coming guys, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. Also, please do me a favour and just state in your email what your story is about in the description, and also provide me with a short written statement of consent just so that I can be above board with everything. And also remember to tell me in the email if you would like to remain anonymous, and please change any names that you don't want to be shared. So a reminder guys to go and check out Eden's channel as well guys, and a big thank you to Eden for her help on this one. The link's in the description below for her channel. So as I mentioned in a previous video, two video genres I've been wanting to cover are hacking stories and social media stories. The social media stories can be anything from Facebook, Twitter, Omegle, Kik, Snapchat, dating apps, etc. So if you have a story that would fit under either of these genres, I would love to hear from you. But remember guys, even if you don't have this type of story, please continue to send your story in anyway. As always, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram for updates throughout the week. You can also catch me on my second gaming channel, all of which have links in the description below. Thanks again for always tuning in for the encouragement and the support, and I'll see you mates in the next one.
Number 4.
I live in Singapore, where, among many things, we are well known for low crime rates, and a young woman like me can walk home safely, even at 2 a.m. However, as we all know, a low crime rate doesn't mean no crime. Despite being 28, I have often been chided for being far from streetwise and a little too trusting at times. A few months back, my friendliness came back to bite me. Having finished my closing shift, I headed for supper and took what I assumed was a shortcut home. My usual path goes past a few blocks of flats, a construction site, and cuts through a block, adding a few layers of protection. Also, it's well lit. The path I took that night, it wasn't. I wasn't afraid though, as I had my music on while I was heading home. But just then, I crossed paths with one of the construction workers from the site I walked by. He looked young and tanned, with a checkered shirt and a dark blue cloth wrapped around his middle. Some background information here. The foreign workers in our country have been treated with a mix of warmth and disdain. While many work harder than most to send money back to their families or for a better life for themselves, some have been known to make a public nuisance and even harass women. I was unfortunate enough to meet the latter that night. Out of politeness, I bid the young man good night before continuing on my way. During a lull in my music, however, I felt as if there were eyes on me. I turned to look around, and there was the man, standing, but when I turned around at a bend, my heart began to beat, as if a mad drummer was using it for band practice, whispering to one woman, "Miss, don't look, but that man..." To my best friend, she revealed that I wasn't the only person who had the experience in my area, apparently. 4 other friends of hers who also lived around my residence had also been stalked by a construction worker. Whether it was the same man or not is anyone's guess. It took me a few hours to calm myself down before reporting it to the police. The woman on the line was initially sharp at me for the fact that I didn't report it at once, but eventually took my statement, gently yet firmly telling me not to be too friendly and to take another path from now on. On a more positive note, she said that she would send a squad to regularly patrol the area. I can only hope that the stalker is apprehended, and the next time he tries anything funny, it's an undercover cop who will take him down for good. I no longer take that path, even in the daytime.
Number 3.
I grew up in a family heavily involved with law enforcement, as both my mum and stepdad worked at our local DA's office as prosecutors. My stepdad still works there, while my mum switched jobs a couple of years ago. This incident happened about 8 months ago to my stepdad, who I'll be referring to in this story as Gus. It'll probably come as a surprise to most people that, generally speaking, the people defendants in criminal cases usually hate the most are not the prosecutor, but the defense attorney. I don't know if it's the fact that they have closer relations with them or what, but 9 times out of 10, that's usually